Every day when I wake up in the morning, I see the sky and I think about the things that you've made, all the beauty and your glory is showing, yeah. It never bores me to look at the ocean. The waves are crashing, the water spraying up in my face. I look above and all the seagulls are soaring, yeah. We've got to overcome the darkness, so we don't get caught in the middle, between the hopeful and the heartless. So, hello, good day, good morning, I just can't stop smiling, because today is a brand new day, and all the darkness and the pain is just fading behind me. Oh Lord, what a beautiful day. All the planets surround me, the way they orbit just boggles my mind, the way the sun keeps on shining, yeah. We got to overcome the darkness, so we don't get caught in the middle, between the hopeful and the heartless. So, hello, good day, good morning, I just can't stop smiling, because today is a brand new day, and all the darkness and the pain is just fading behind me. Oh Lord, what a beautiful day. There's nothing to fear, it'll be okay. It's the day that the Lord has made. It's the day that the Lord has made. There's nothing to fear, it'll be okay. It'll be okay. It's the day that the Lord has made. That the Lord has it's made. The day that the Lord has made. That the Lord has made. So, hello, good day, good morning, I just can't stop smiling, because today is a brand new day, and all the darkness and the pain is just fading behind me. Oh Lord, what a beautiful day.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Live with Doug. We are thinking through not just any part of God's Word, but today we are thinking through those places that angels dare to tread. But have no fear. We have the Holy Spirit. We have coffee. We're entering. Here we go. I don't know. I had too much coffee today already. Good morning, everyone. Glad that you are with us, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. It's great to have you along. So we are continuing to look at these difficult passages, some of them difficult to understand, some of them difficult to accept on occasion. We're talking about women and headship and all of that. And today we're going to look at 1 Corinthians 14 and the statement that says women should be silent in the churches. So I want to say on the front end here, I'm not really putting forth an argument for this interpretation. I have pored over this text, I don't know how many times. I've read lots and lots of different viewpoints on it, as I'm sure many of you have, and it's a hard one. I would say it's as hard, if not harder, than 1 Corinthians 11. So you are free to poke holes in my argument. I can poke plenty of holes in my own argument. So that's not really going to be helpful. If someone in the comments after the video starts putting in all the reasons why this doesn't work, great. If you want to help, put forth an explanation of the text all the way through that answers the questions. That's what would be most helpful. So I'm not trying to in any way shut down conversation and so on. I'm just letting you know on the front end, what will happen is there'll be somebody come along and watch this, or just see the title and watch the first 2 minutes, and then they'll give me some kill shot they think of how this undoes this argument. Well, yeah, it's hard. It's really hard, and I'm not sure what to do with all of it. But I'm going to give you what seems most likely to me. And then if somebody else has a better interpretation, I'm all over it because I want to know. So first thing we have to do, 1 Corinthians 14, I guess I should read this section. Let me jump down here. So here's the hard part. The women are to keep silent in the churches. Why? For they are not permitted to speak, but are to subject themselves just as the law also says. If they desire to learn anything, let them ask their own husbands at home, for it is improper for a woman to speak in church. So those are the two verses that are in dispute here or in question. First thing that I want to point out is that this is in the context of prophecy. We always have to be careful and not just grab a statement, grab a text, and build a theological case on the sentence or the phrase, which is so often what we do. And this is what systematic theology does. Right? We're going to build a theology of ecclesiology, of church gathering, and we're going to look up all the verses that talk about this. We're going to build a theology of women or something like that. And this verse says that women can't speak, so now we build our theology there. That's not the proper way to interpret. We need to look at the context. And this is in the context of prophecy. Look, verse 31, for you can all prophesy one by one. And he concludes, if anyone thinks he's a prophet or spiritual, let him recognize ... Verse 39, therefore, my brethren, desire earnestly to prophesy. So the context is in prophecy. First thing we have to get straight is, what is prophecy? And I don't know exactly. Maybe sometime we'll do a study on spiritual gifts. I think actually someone asked me if we would do that a few weeks ago. And maybe that'd be worth our time. But I will tell you right now, of all the gifts, prophecy for me is the hardest to determine exactly what it is. But I am committed, that's not the right way to say it, I'm convinced that prophecy is not preaching. A lot of the, especially in the Reformed camps and the cessationist camps, they will define prophecy as, they'll divide it into two, foretelling and forthtelling. And in a passage like this, they will say that this is the forthtelling, which is basically what we call preaching. It doesn't work. It does not work. There's nothing in the New Testament that is a good parallel for what we call preaching. What we call preaching, the New Testament would call teaching and maybe exhortation. So if you've been taught that prophecy is preaching, like a pastor getting up and preaching a sermon on Sunday morning, that make them prove it from the scriptures. It's a hard sell as far as I'm concerned. And it also, I think, how do I want to say this? Most of the folks who believe that preaching and prophecy are basically two ways of describing the same thing also argue that women are not allowed to preach. How does that make sense of 1 Corinthians 11, which we just looked at the last few days, where it says women are to have their head covered when they prophesy? If prophecy is preaching, then that text is saying women can preach as long as their head is covered. So you should just eliminate from your thinking that prophecy equals preaching. Grady says, the testimony of Jesus Christ is a spirit of prophecy, if that helps muddy the waters. Yeah, exactly. Revelation says that, right? And that, as I've dug into that, it makes me wonder, is there some association with this idea of prophecy and seeing Jesus as the fulfillment of the scriptures of the Old Testament? We sort of take that for granted because we have the New Testament, which tells us the Old Testament and the prophecies were about Jesus, but that was new news to the early church, and it does make me wonder, is there some connection? Is this gift, does it have something to do with being able to see Jesus in the scriptures? But I don't know. I've poured all over this thing, and I'm not entirely sure what first century prophecy was or what New Testament prophecy is. But that be the case, it's not preaching in the way we use preaching. That I'm pretty confident of. Okay, second thing is, we have to look at the broader context of 1 Corinthians. Whatever this statement about women keeping silent means, it needs to be understood in its context. And chapters 12 through 14 of 1 Corinthians are dealing with spiritual gifts, but not just spiritual gifts. It's not a systematic theology. It's not a, here, let me tell you what all the gifts are. That's not Paul's primary concern. He is dealing with chaos. He's dealing with arrogance and lovelessness, and a church that apparently is manifesting all these gifts, speaking in tongues, prophetic revelations, miracles, healings, all of this, and yet there's a lot of wickedness and selfishness in this church. There are factions and divisions. There's a man sleeping with his father's wife, and the rest of the church, not only are they not addressing it as sin, but they're exulting, they're rejoicing, patting themselves on the back, basically, for their own grace in tolerating this stuff. And they don't know what to do about marriage. They don't know what to do about singleness and sexuality. And what do they do about food sacrificed to idols? And there's division in the church because some are eating and some are pulling away from them and rebuking them. And we saw the head covering thing, the Lord's Supper. I mean, Paul has some strong words there about the way they are dividing and putting some in the have camp and some in the have not camp. And as they participate in this ceremony of unity, the Lord's Supper, communion, they are driving all these wedges and judging others, condemning others, and making heroes out of some. And Paul says some of you have been disciplined by the Lord such that they've died because of your factions and divisions. And then chapters 12 through 14 are largely one great rebuke for their mishandling of spiritual gifts, lacking love. Chapter 13, 1 Corinthians 13. I wonder how many of you had 1 Corinthians 13 read at your wedding. I did. It's not a wedding chapter. In fact, I always find it ironic because the most recent thing Paul said in 1 Corinthians about marriage is, don't do it. Stay single like I am. And we think 1 Corinthians 13 is about marriage. It's not. It's in the context of spiritual gifts. And he's saying, look, it doesn't matter how quote unquote gifted you are by the Spirit of God. If you don't have love, you have nothing. Y'all think you're spiritual. You think you're wonderful because you have all these gifts. Well, no, you don't love each other. You're not wonderful. You're not pleasing the Lord. And he says, when it comes to speaking in tongues, stop doing it this way because you're creating chaos. It's way more important to prophesy because prophecy is intelligible. Tongues is unintelligible unless there's an interpretation. And that's the context of this. So let me go back and show you. So then, tongues are a sign not for those who believe, but to unbelievers. Interesting to have this kind of discussion with our charismatic friends. Tongues are a sign to unbelievers. But prophecy, not to unbelievers, but to those who believe. So I'm not going to, I know the temptation here is going to go down rabbit trails on defining all this, and that's not what I'm going to do, but I had to set the context. So prophecy is for believers. Therefore, if the whole church assembles together, so church is gathering, here it's the body, and all speak in tongues, and an ungifted men or unbelievers enter, they'll say, you're mad. You're crazy. All these people are speaking languages nobody understands. It's chaos. But if all prophesy, and an unbeliever or ungifted man enters, he's convicted by all. He's called to account by all. The secrets of his heart are disclosed, so he will fall on his face and worship God, declaring that God is certainly among you. So you see the point. The broader point is prophecy in the gathering is better than tongues because the unbeliever will be convicted through this prophecy and know that God is among them. What then, brethren? When you assemble, each one has a psalm, has a teaching, has a revelation, has a tongue, has an interpretation. Boy, I'm so tempted to go down these rabbit trails. I go back and forth on verse 26 here, and some of you are not going to like this. It's okay. You don't have to agree with me. I'm just telling you what I wrestle with. I can't decide whether or not Paul is rebuking them or encouraging them with this verse. Because he doesn't say when you assemble, everyone should have a psalm, teaching, revelation, and tongue. He says you do have one. I think it's possible he's admonishing them that you don't all have to use all your gifts every time you get together. You each bring this and you're like, I got a psalm, I got a teaching, I want time on the floor, I want to speak. I'm not sure he's saying that's a good thing. He might be. And in our day, when we meet in a building and, one or a couple of guys do all the work and the rest of the gathering are spectators, maybe we should receive this as an admonition to do things differently and not have a service. And if you're new around here, I just did a whole series on the church that you might be interested in to see how I unpack that. So anyway, I'm not sure if this is an encouragement or a rebuke, but either way, what he's saying, his conclusion is clear. When you gather, everything is to build others up, to be done for edification. If anyone speaks a tongue, 2 or 3 at most, and one must interpret. If there's no interpreter, and here, look at this is important. If there's no interpreter, the one who has a tongue must keep silent in the church. Do you see why I'm stressing that in this context? If there's no interpreter, then the one who has a tongue, who has the gift of tongues, is to keep silent in the church. What is it we're talking about today? Women keeping silent in the church. This phrase occurs not just to women, but even to men who have a tongue, but there's no interpreter. See that? So what's he going for here? Order and a lack of chaos and confusion in the assembly. He says, let 2 or 3 prophets speak and let others pass judgment. We'll come back to that in a minute because I think it's important for this discussion. But if a revelation is made to another who is seated, the first one must keep silent. So silence is not only commanded of women in this text, but also to men who have a tongue without an interpreter, or to a prophet when another man, or I suppose could be woman, receives a revelation. Be silent when it's not your turn so that there's not confusion and chaos and everybody throwing out their stuff and nobody's being edified because everyone's vying for their opportunity to speak. For you can all prophesy one by one so that all may learn and all may be exhorted, and the spirit of the prophets are subject to prophets. For God is not a God of confusion, but of peace. See, that's the context here for this. Peace, lack of confusion, true edification, which cannot happen if everybody's vying for the opportunity to speak. It's in that context that he says the women are to keep silent in the churches. Same phrase he used twice now. Why? For they are not permitted to speak, but are to subject themselves, just as the law says, if they desire to learn anything, let them ask their own husbands at home, for it's improper for a woman to speak in church. Was it from you the word of God first went forth, or has it come to you only? If anyone thinks he's a prophet or spiritual, let him recognize the things which I write to you are the Lord's command. But if anyone does not recognize this, he is not recognized. That's a strong statement. Therefore, my brethren, desire earnestly to prophesy and do not forbid to speak in tongues, but all things must be done properly and in an orderly manner. So you see the broader context and emphasis here. Order, lack of chaos, everyone taking their turns, no one speaking out of turn, and prophecy is more important than speaking in tongues. Okay, so we're already moving along in time here. I'm going to give you a very quick summary of what I think is going on, and I'm not going to try to persuade you or prove all the nuances. I said at the beginning, there are holes in this. There are holes in every argument, big holes in every argument that I've seen, every explanation of this text. So I don't know for sure what it means, but I'm just going to lay out in broad strokes what I think makes the most sense and leave it to you to wrestle with it, because I don't want to spend a lot of time here because we're just going to battle over the same ground, I think, over and over and over again. So what makes the most sense to me, and again, this is not without its challenges, is this statement here is interesting. Let 2 or 3 prophets speak and let the others pass judgment. Now, I've already suggested to you that I don't think prophecy is preaching. If so, then you have to allow women to preach, don't you? Based on 1 Corinthians 11. So this prophecy is something else that even women can do, according to 1 Corinthians 11, as long as they show the proper submission to their husbands. But notice here, let the others pass judgment. I cannot not say this. You realize this cannot happen in our traditional model. None of this happens. You get a guy up there preaching, and there's just no room for any other edification from anybody else. That's a downside of our current model. All right, I won't go back there. Let 2 or 3 prophets speak. Let the others pass judgment. So if you have prophets among you, and they believe they have received a revelation from the Lord, the rest of the congregation is to discern, to make a judgment, to evaluate whether or not the prophecies are from the Lord. That's similar to, did I pull up here? 1 Thessalonians 5, 19 through 21. Do not quench the spirit. Do not despise prophetic utterances, but examine everything. Hold fast to that which is good. Abstain from every form of evil. These may be completely distinct statements. It's possible, sort of proverbial one-offs here. Or it may be that he's saying receive prophetic utterances, but then examine them, which would fit with what I see here. The rest of the body is to examine whether or not the prophecies are from the Lord. If a revelation is made to another prophet who is seated, then the first one should stop speaking and the second one gets to talk. This is all very interesting. Why is the second guy more important than the first? I don't know. For you can all prophesy one by one, so that you may all learn and be exhorted. The spirits of the prophets are subject to the prophets. See, the point is, it's not chaos. It's not like everybody gets to just speak whenever they want to. That's the concern. That's what they're doing. These are very immature Christians. Me, it's my turn. I want to talk. He's like, settle down. Because God's not a God of confusion. So what makes most sense to me is the women keeping silent here is silent when it comes to evaluating whether the prophecies are to be received by the church or not. Because that's an authoritative decision. If the prophets are not speaking, if what they say is not from God, then it should be discarded. And it seems to me like he's saying the men are to determine, is this from God, and what are we going to do about it? How are we going to apply it to the church? And that would be an authoritative decision, and women are not to have authority in the church. They are to subject themselves. Now the next question is, he says, just as the law also says. What law? The NAS has it capitalized, so they think it's the law of Moses. If it is it the Old Covenant proper? sometimes law means the entire Old Testament, which, could he be referring back to even Genesis 2, where women, Eve is placed under the headship of Adam? That makes most sense to me, but again, it's not without its challenges. If they desired to learn anything, if the women desired to learn anything about the judgment, I think, let them ask their husbands at home, for it's improper for the woman to speak in church. Was it from you? Now, I think this is a broader, it seems like, and again, please, I keep saying it seems like, because I don't know, but it seems to fit fairly well that women are pushing against everything. We saw this in 1 Corinthians 11. They're rebelling. They're joining the rebellion, the feminist rebellion of the culture. And he's got a pretty harsh word here. Was it from you the word of God went forth? This is why I think the law may be referring to Genesis. The law, the word of God, starting in Genesis, didn't come from you, Corinthians, right? It hasn't come to you only. This is how it's been all the way along. When it comes to authority, a wife is to submit to her husband. So you can't break with this. When it comes to the authoritative decisions of the church, women are not to exercise authority, which is clearly what he says in 1 Timothy. If anyone thinks he's prophet or spiritual, let him recognize that what I'm writing to you are the Lord's command. So this is not optional. If anyone doesn't recognize this, he is not recognized. Therefore, desire earnestly to prophesy, but all things must be done orderly. So that's my best run at 1 Corinthians 14. Several others, D.A. Carson, Max Turner, I think Grudem. Don't quote me on that, but I think Grudem holds this opinion in some form at least. So that's what I think it's getting at. Let me look at a couple of your comments here, and then we will call it a day. Dale says, wedding verses are always a bit cringe. I am teaching through 1 Corinthians on Wednesday night at church, and it amazes me how Paul always brings them back to starting point of Christ in all things. Yeah, and boy, would we be better off if we did that, huh? Grady says, I think it comes down to be orderly. Don't let women or men follow their natural tendency of one-upmanship, turn into a free-for-all. That is definitely the larger context there, and it seems like he's giving specific ways for men and women to do it, to me. Oink Oink says, seems like how prophets were tested in Deuteronomy 18. I would agree, except this seems a little different than that to me. The way you tested a prophet in the Old Testament was to see whether what they predicted comes true, right? Whereas here, it seems a little different. It seems like he doesn't say wait and see if it comes true. He says the body needs to put their heads together and say, okay, does this seem like it's something from the Lord? So it seems a little different to me. Lon says, if preaching is not teaching principles and truths, which sounds like prophecy, what then is prophecy as it exists in the church today? Well, it's all the way through 1 Corinthians. It's tied to revelation, like spontaneous revelation. That's what he says. If one man is prophesying, do you see that? If one man is prophesying, 2 or 3 prophets speak. If a revelation is made to another, the first is to keep silent. So if we were going to call it preaching, then a man gets up to preach and another guy says, wait, I got to preach. I got something to say. So the first guy is supposed to sit down and be quiet. Notice the word revelation is tied here. So the prophet is receiving a spontaneous revelation, which is not preaching, seems to me. Oink Oink says, perhaps Daniel 9 shines light on an appointed to seal up both vision and prophet. Yeah, maybe. I think that's talking about Jesus is sealing up the prophecies of the coming Messiah. So I think that would be a different context than this. All right, well, there you go. I know you have lots more questions, and again, I don't mean to just shut it down. I'm just saying I would not die on the hill of this interpretation. It's just the one that has, in my opinion, fewer holes, but it's certainly not without holes. So if this is correct, it doesn't mean women can't say anything. Again, 1 Corinthians 11 says women can prophesy as long as their head is covered. And we talked about that, so I'm not going to go over all that again. So that says women can prophesy. So it doesn't seem like an absolute prohibition against women speaking fits as we combine these two texts. So I think women can prophesy, but men are to decide if the prophecy is something they're going to receive and implement. I don't take it as an absolute prohibition for women to ask any questions in the gathering of the church, so long as their attitude is one of submission and not authoritative. You know, if a woman, you can ask questions in such a way that you're really teaching. I think that would be inappropriate for a woman to do in the gathering. I don't think women are to take that kind of authority. But I don't think this is a complete gag order on women where they're not allowed to say anything in the assembly. That's my take. You may have a different view, and you've got to go with your conscience and what you think it means. And if you're a church leader, you've got to enforce what you think it means. In our home gatherings, women are allowed to ask questions and make comments as long as they do it respectful and humbly and not trying to exercise authority. So that's how I see it. Going to call it a day there. Have a great day. Guys, come back tomorrow. We got another Fridays with the Fellows tomorrow. We're going to continue to talk about manhood. So we'll see you then. Have a great day. God bless. Keep studying the Word.